Richard Dawkins is one of the most famous biologists alive today. Before he became known for his anti-religious tirades,
we could all be wrong about the flying spaghetti monster and the pink unicorn and the flying teapot.
His most significant intellectual contribution to the world was this book, The Selfish Gene. The book argues that all of biological evolution should be understood through the struggle between genes, not individuals. And it describes this struggle as a uniquely selfish one. Genes are only ever looking out for their own interests, not the good of the group or the species, hence the title. So even though it seems as though bees help each other to build a hive for the good of the colony, really all that is happening here is that the genes within the worker bees are helping copies of themselves reproduce through their mother, the queen. So the apparent altruism at the individual level is revealed to be no more than a selfish one at the level of genes. At least that's how Dawkins sees the world. But can all of life and evolution really be reduced down to selfish genes? And if so, does that make an unequal capitalist society an inevitability? That's what we'll explore in this video, and in doing so, I hope to shed some light on the complex interaction between science and politics. The concept at the core of the selfish gene is known as kin selection, and it relies on the simple observation that you share just as many genes with your brothers and sisters as you do with your own children. So from a gene's eye view, helping your mother to make more of your siblings and raising them as if they were your own is just as good as reproducing and caring for your own kids. You can think of this as indirect reproduction, or reproducing through your relatives. Dawkins argues that because of the power of indirect reproduction, the apparent altruism at the individual level is really just the outcome of the selfish interests of genes. For a specific example of how this works, take vervet monkeys, who give alarm calls when predators are nearby to alert the other monkeys around them. This act draws attention to themselves in order to save everyone else. This is clearly an example of biological altruism. The brave monkey that gives the call is putting her life on the line to save all the others. But according to kin selection theory, if the monkeys were related enough, we can reinterpret this behaviour in quite a different way. From the gene's eye view, we can see that some of the monkeys contain the gene for alarm calling and some don't. And if one monkey gives an alarm call in a group of highly related monkeys, it's likely that she will save several copies of the gene even if she dies. So the gene is really just acting selfishly to maximize the number of copies of itself that exist. It's no longer an altruistic behavior of monkeys acting for the good of the group. Dawkins therefore concludes that pure disinterested altruism has no place in nature. The implications of all this on human nature didn't go unnoticed. Dawkins later wrote that one of his foreign publishers couldn't sleep for 3 days because he was so troubled by what he saw as its cold, bleak message. Many also accused Dawkins of indirectly supporting Thatcher's individualistic and conservative politics of the time by painting biological organisms, and therefore humans too, as innately selfish. Nazis were also worryingly supportive of the book's message, writing in a far-right magazine, "For us as racial nationalists, the selfish gene is an important vindication of our position. What the evolutionary theoreticians, like Dawkins, have shown us is that the only type of social organisation which can evolve, let alone work, is one based upon kinship, upon the ties of blood and race." Oh dear. For context, there was also a picture of Dawkins at the top of the article, and one of the authors also wrote a pamphlet titled "Did 6 Million Really Die?" So there's no doubt about the connection there. If you ever notice that your work gets supported by Nazis,
the neo-Nazis arrived in support of an anti-trans rights speaker.
It's probably a good sign that you should reconsider the political implications of what you're working on. Needless to say, Dawkins is no Nazi. So how then does he justify the implications of his book? In order to shield himself from Nazi association, Dawkins draws on one of the big ideas of Scottish philosopher David Hume, known as the is-ought problem, and its related descendant, the fact-value distinction. In short, it states that no matter how many facts you give me, I can't directly get to a value judgment without some extra explanations. Take the sentence, "Murder causes suffering to the victim, therefore it is wrong." If we separate this out, we can see that we've jumped from a factual statement, "Murder causes suffering," to a value judgment, "Murder is wrong." And what gets hidden is the bridging statement, "Causing other humans to suffer is wrong." Obviously that's a reasonable assumption to make, but sometimes the bridging explanations are more controversial. Is everything that is illegal morally wrong? Is the Bible the source of morality? Regardless of whether we agree with them or not, it's additional explanations like these that are required to logically go from factual statements to value judgments. Dawkins uses Hume's fact-value distinction to defend the moral outlook that The Selfish Gene gives about the world. He claims that his book only describes the facts about evolution, and therefore says nothing about morality. But plenty of readers brushed past the nuance here and began to draw moral conclusions based off of his book. And who's to blame them for making this jump? Dawkins' metaphor of selfish genes is really powerful, and it's pretty hard to avoid making a connection to morality. Defenders of the selfish gene have therefore had to account for its implied morality, even if Dawkins wanted to keep these issues separate. One such commentary was given in 2021 by biologist Arvid Ahlgren, who wrote a book evaluating the gene's eye view of evolution in a more modern context. While I thought the vast majority of the book was really good, there was one sentence that struck me as odd. Our commitment to the science of evolution says nothing about our moral outlook. That is a much more potent claim than a simple fact-value distinction. In Hume's original articulation, all he is saying is that to pass from a fact to a value, you need additional assumptions that have to be explained. But here, Ahlgren is saying something much more potent, that we can never pass from a fact to a value, and that the collections of facts and values live in two completely different realms. But this ignores how both science and ethics works. The values can't be derived solely from the facts, but they're certainly influenced by them. And likewise, scientific facts can only be elucidated within the framework of certain norms and value judgments. Here's a different example to show this in action. At the moment, we're seeing AI develop at an increasingly rapid pace. ChatGPT can now pass a whole bunch of high school exams and the Turing tests, but you can also trick it into designing death camps or creating pretty racist and sexist raps.
If you see a woman in a lab coat, she's probably just there to clean the floor. But if you see a man in a lab coat, then he's probably got the knowledge and skill you're looking for. If you see a scientist of color, they are probably just there for show. But if you see a white scientist, then they are the ones who really know.
So far, all of these statements are factual. I've said nothing about whether these things are good or bad, though the racism rap is pretty scary. But some potential ought statements could be, ChatGPT is bad for society as it reflects institutionalized sexism and racism, or we should slow down the pace of AI research so we can implement appropriate safety and ethical standards, or AI can only be good for the world as it is technological progress, and new technological innovations always end up benefiting humanity. According to Hume, none of those value judgments can be directly derived from the facts I gave before. We need extra explanations to get there. But clearly the values are influenced by the facts. You can't say that ChatGPT is bad for society because it's racist without first knowing that it can do things like make racist raps. If the facts were instead, ChatGPT is never racist and has plenty of safeguards in place, then the way we'd make value judgments about it would be fundamentally different. Philosopher and staunch critic of Dawkins, Mary Midgley, was keenly aware of this phenomenon of empirical facts shaping our ethics, despite Hume's is-ought distinction. If such a toy like the selfish gene is handed to moral philosophers and they aren't promptly slapped, they will use it for a very long time. They like a little bit of empirical backing and off they go. You only need to look at two hugely influential political philosophers to see how our understanding of the natural world shapes how we think it ought to be like. English philosopher Thomas Hobbes starts with the assumption that nature is brutal and bloody, and concludes that we need strong authorities like states and governments to prevent us from fighting each other to the death. Anarchist Peter Kropotkin, on the other hand, uses examples of crabs, ants, bees, birds, and humans helping each other through mutual aid to show that nature can also be highly cooperative. And counter to Hobbes, he shows how governments and states have actually hindered cooperation, not promoted it. This therefore supports his broader philosophy of anarcho-communism, calling for the abolition of states entirely. That these two philosophers came to diametrically opposed conclusions based on different purported facts about nature goes to show just how much the is's can affect the oughts. So thinking that our knowledge of evolution and our moral outlook can be cleanly separated completely misunderstands how we humans come to see the world. Hume may be right that, logically speaking, we can't get from a fact to a value directly. But humans aren't logical robots. We argue with emotions and plenty of socio-political assumptions about the world. There's no getting away from that. The science can never be separated from the politics. Dawkins admits that he overlooked the possibility that people would use the selfish gene to promote fascism, and called it annoying that kin selection was being dragged down to the ephemeral level of human politics. But again, Dawkins is trying to separate the inseparable here. If you want to just do the science and ignore the politics, people will come and join it all back together for you, and those people could well be Nazis. Today, Dawkins continues to try to do science while ignoring the political implications. He toys with the idea of eugenics on Twitter and says that facts ignore ideology. He emphasises the sex binary.
As a biologist, there are two sexes. And that's all there is to it.
Questions trans identities.
J.K. Rowling has been bullied.
And when people called him out on his transphobia, he was once again Pikachu-faced shocked that his scientific or academic words could ever have been interpreted politically.
I was asking people to discuss. I thought it was a reasonable thing to discuss.
I'll say it again before ending this video with a brilliant quote from the dialectical biologist. Science can never be separated from politics. We believe that science, in all its senses, is a social process that both causes and is caused by social organisation. To do science is to be a social actor engaged, whether one likes it or not, in political activity. The denial of the interpenetration of the scientific and the social is itself a political act, giving support to social structures that hide behind scientific objectivity to perpetuate exploitation, racism, elitism, and colonialism. Of course, the speed of light is the same under socialism and capitalism, but whether the cause of tuberculosis is said to be bacteria or the capitalist exploitation of workers, whether the death rate from cancer is best reduced by studying oncogenes or by seizing control of factories, these questions can be decided objectively only within the framework of certain socio-political assumptions.